the challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a program called Challenge.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of faith. Nearly 60 years later, during these challenging times, we'll take a new look at our divisions, our connections, in a new program called Challenge 2.0. The initial impact of the COVID-19 pandemic was most severe in and near major cities. That's changing. COVID infections among farm workers are now exploding. They are considered essential workers, but are often unable to obtain needed protection or health care. That then is the subject of this edition of Challenge 2.0, Essential but Unprotected, Farm Workers and the Pandemic. So we are very fortunate to have two wonderful guests with the depth of knowledge, not only in terms of advocacy for farm workers and the conditions in which they encounter, but a very deep personal knowledge of those conditions. So I would like to introduce at this time and welcome Rosalinda Guillen, who is the leader of Community to Community and foodjustice.org. Rosalinda, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, thank you very much.
You bet. And Jose Ortiz of Catholic Community Services of Western Washington, who has had some decades of experience in Hispanic ministries. Jose, thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you for inviting me.
As we noted just briefly in the introduction, the issue of farm worker safety and farm worker welfare is not only one of advocacy, but it's also a very personal one for both of you. Would you feel comfortable telling us a little bit about your personal experiences in terms of farm worker issues?
I come from a family that has been working the land in the United States and Mexico for generations. In fact, as far as back as we can remember, way back to ejidos in Zacapu, Michoacan, my family has been, as my father used to say, we're people of the land. We've always been people of the land. Part of my family is from Coahuila, of my family are Texans. For us, it's almost like in our DNA, it's genetic, you know, the idea of being a farm worker, of growing food, being on the land. My father was a migrant worker from the time he was 10 years old in the United States, and really a migrant worker. The generation in the 40s and 50s that traveled in caravans, hundreds of families at a time sometimes, car caravans across the country. They did the migrant circuit going, they would start out in Texas and move east, some of the crops in the south, go back up to the northeast in New York, and then cut across, you know, the other farming states like Michigan, Wisconsin, come all the way across to Idaho, and then down into California, and then back into Texas. So it's a migrant circuit that millions and millions of farm workers took after the Depression. And I think that there's several generations involved in that. So for us, and for myself and my father, and I'm the oldest of 8, we've all worked in the fields, starting at the same age as my father, 10 years old, some of us 8, some 9, but 10 is like the average for really getting in the field and working as an adult. So our experience is supporting our family, working alongside our family on the land, you know, a generational poverty because of that, and really a deep fundamental understanding of our role, I guess you could say, and our place within this huge culture and system in the United States of growing food, all different types of food. So it's easy to speak about it because we've lived it. It's like I said, it's almost a genetic DNA component of who we are in the United States, both traditionally, a culture, how we express ourselves, how we see the world. It's very much ingrained in all of us, including all my brothers and sisters. And it's starting to filter down into our grandchildren. I mean, our children and our grandchildren, but it starts to fade as we get into our grandchildren. So,
Jose, let's turn to you right now. What was your experience, and what was the experience of your family in terms of working on farms?
Yeah, from what I understand, my grandparents were merchants. They've always found, you know, something to sell, and it was mostly food that was custom to us. They went to wrestling matches, to wherever there was dances or cultural events or things like that. And they always found food to be able to sell, to feed others, but also to feed our own family. My grandparents traveled to Texas us with the Bracero program. And that was my mom was born in Texas because of that. My grandparents and part of our family migrated into Texas, and several of my relatives were born in Texas. My understanding and what I remember since I was probably about 3 or 4 is that we arrived in Tijuana, and we were very, very poor. But my grandpa was the first one to leave his community. And we survived by working in the dumps, by collecting whatever we could, pop cans, bottles, copper, whatever we found. And now that I'm older and just remember what I used to play with, it was just like leftovers a lot of times from the United States, garbage from the United States or from the rich in Mexico. And we used to play with a lot of leftovers from the hospitals, garbage from the hospitals, and we used to play with it like if we used to make slingshots out of the rubber hoses that they use for surgeries or for different things like that. I've learned of the migrant population probably because of my grandparent having a home in Tijuana, and we saw a lot of migrants coming through our house. I know that it was a struggle for us to have enough for us to survive, but my grandpa would always say, just add a little bit more water to the frijoles, to the beans. And, we always find ways to feed the people. And, it wasn't nothing to see 1 or 5 people living with us on a little house that was already, not big enough for us. And so that was normal for us to help people as they arrived. And then later in a few years, we moved into California. My mom worked in the fields somewhat, and some of my aunts, but my dad and others, they dedicated their time working in construction. And so I didn't have the experience of working in the fields, not until my parents got divorced, and we ended up following my grandparents and my uncles into Oregon and Washington. They've been up here, some of them since the 50s, so we just followed them up here. And that's when we started working in the fields. I was probably about 11 years old when we arrived into Oregon during the winter. It's something that I'll never forget because, we were very poor, especially in the situations where how we left with hardly anything, just what we were wearing. And I didn't have socks or underwears or even a coat to work in the fields. But we were out there. I didn't go to school for about a year, and we would go out there and pick walnuts and filberts. We had to dig them out of the snow. And back there was no laws to protect the kids. It was just anybody that would go there. It didn't matter if there was during the school year, they would allow kids in one way or another. We were working, and I'll never forget those winters being so cold and poor, being bounced from house to house. From relatives, you're there for a few days, and then you would run out your welcome, and we had to move to another place. And that's how it was probably till about I was 20. That's where I learned more about migration, but also forced migration, where people worked very, very hard and long hours, but it wasn't enough to survive. And it's very common today to see the same situations for our brothers and sisters.
Do you think that those sorts of experiences you both encountered allows or yields a better ability to understand and to hear other people and where they're coming from?
I told you that my family was Texan in Michoacan in northern Mexico, Coahuila. But the fact is for generations, North California, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and those states were northern Mexico. So technically, my family, according to when you talk to Mexican people, we were norteños. We were traditionally part of northern Mexico, which was then forcibly, with a war, taken from southern Mexico and it was the expansion of manifest destiny of the United States to continue to expand, right? And they took us and the land. And I think it was after that that we became migrant workers, because our land was taken from us, and a lot of indigenous people's land and Latino who, a lot of the Latinos in the Southwest were also part indigenous and indigenous to Mexico, but in northern Mexico. Mm. So for us, as a community, the mestizo and the brownness of our culture, the border traditionally didn't exist because we were all one country and we were all one people. And for many years, even after the land was taken from us, there was an easy flow of contact between us and the other parts of Mexico, familial relations, economic support and sustainability across that. And as the United States militarized more, we became more and more separated. When Jose was talking about, in Tijuana, being in Tijuana and the life of around the border and coming into the bridge, I think that because of our history, right? Because of the imperialism and being forced, the migration, the creation of the farm worker community as it exists today in the United States, with the migrating and the working specifically in agriculture, was created. It was a structure developed after, the northern Mexico was brought into the United States, and we were a population, and I feel very strongly about this, we were a population that needed to know that we were conquered. In many, many ways, there were many ways used for that. The Texas Rangers were specifically set out to enforce and to keep Mexicans within the quote unquote legal structure of the United States, the law, right? To follow the law. The removal of farm workers, or I shouldn't say farm workers, but subsistence farmers and peasantry in Texas and Arizona from their own land, where they were peacefully functioning, producing food with native peoples and, creating a culture of the people of the land in the Southwest. The Mexican people were forcibly removed, and many of them hanged and killed in order to take the land, so that the big landowners from the eastern southern part of the United States came in and took over ownership, right, of that. We have many stories going back in our family that my father told us about, experiences of his experiences and his parents' experiences and his grandparents' experiences of interactions, violent interactions with the white settlers in Texas especially. Cesar Chavez, his family were, peasant farmers in Arizona, and they were forcibly removed from their land and became migrant workers. And so this is a history that affects millions of us that in many ways has been forgotten, that needs to be linked to what is happening today with the pandemic and the COVID. So some of us are fortunate enough to have heard the stories from our grandparents and our parents and can remember it, but we never had the ability to link it to our everyday experience of why we were being treated the way we're being treated now, right? Or even that. So the relationship part that you're asking about, for us, and for me especially, I feel has been a skill that we've developed of relating with different groups to survive. And a culture developed for survival, especially among our own people. Not necessarily with a political understanding of solidarity of why we should, get along with other groups of people, especially white people. Oh my gosh, today, I speak to farm workers that have been in Linden, Washington, for at least one generation. They're like second generation in Linden, and they talk about how Linden, the Christian Reformed Church, has specifically and intentionally assigned what they call angels in the Linden community to target certain Latino families that fit their standard of a Latino family that deserves to be living in the Linden community, it has doors open to them and opportunities open to them. But it requires a certain type of behavior to have an angel support you to have opportunities within the community. You see what I mean? So those types of things guide our relationships with white people. And clouds true, equitable, real friendship of solidarity with white people especially. So I think, now that I'm older and I have seen a lot and have read a lot and understand the political history of this country, I can say that yes, we build a lot of really good relationships. We try because of the racist structure that exists, especially in rural communities. We have to do it in order for it to survive, to be able to find the jobs, to find the housing, to keep people away from, hassling and targeting our children. So it's a whole different perspective. And I have to qualify it with the fact that I have built friendships with white people that are real to a certain level. They're real, and I appreciate that. But it's always clouded by the structural racism that exists in everything around us. So,
Jose, I'd like to ask your perspective on those same issues, and I would ask both of you before we move into COVID to relate to us when you have that separation, as we've seen increasingly happen nowadays in terms of the border wall, how that affects the ability of a branch of family up north of the border in the United States to maintain contact and maintain a viable, supportive relationship with those that are on the other side of the border.
Rosalina has had her own experience, but I think it's very similar. I didn't know my culture enough because I wasn't embraced in that culture. Again, I grew up in a little tiny German town in Oregon, with a lot of German traditions and Russian, that they still dress the same way that they used to when I arrived from Russia. And it's a Catholic town in Oregon. It's called Mount Angel. And La Conner reminds me of the same. It's a little tiny town. You're one. Everybody knows each other, and everybody waves at each other. And we know when there was an outsider, and but we were still an outsider. I mean, where I grew up, I think I fit in because I've done all the sports. So I was good in many sports. So I was different than the rest of the Mexicans. I've been told that many times. You're not one of them. And so I grew up with the mentality of looking at my own heroes as the sports figures. And, I really believed that I was going to be someday a sport person, in some sort of a sport. That was ingrained in us by our coaches and teachers. You could be somebody. And but I didn't know my culture enough. I didn't know my relatives that grew up here. So to go into their homes, I was still an outsider. I didn't fit with my family. As I grew up and started supporting a lot of the Hispanics, a lot of our communities, and a lot of our communities have changed a lot. We kind of just fit in within our own community. So I grew up in 3 or 4 different worlds. So one world was my school, the other one was the church, the other one was my community, my own home, and then the other one was the rest of my families, because we were the newcomers and they've been here for a long time. So my culture and my ideas was completely different. So it was really hard for me. I started going to Mexico when I was 25. I think it was the first time. I was afraid to go to Mexico because of all the stories that I've heard. So I grew up here, in the border in Tijuana, but most of my life up here in California, Oregon, and Washington. So I knew more of the United States more than I did about Mexico. So I went to Mexico when I was 25, and there was something that made me happy. There was a lot of festivals, a lot of cultural things, a lot of history to see the pyramids. I was down there for 3 months, so I really traveled to the small towns, and then to know that Mexicans could build things. The Mexicans are, they're really good at what they do, all the amazing art and all the beautiful buildings, the history of the museums, the churches, and, something that we were told the opposite growing up and learning about history, about, the same thing that's happening now. Mexicans are criminals and Mexicans are this and that. But going back to Mexico, it helped me a lot with, being myself. Then I went back for a second time, and I met my wife in Mexico, which I never thought I would, end up with somebody from Mexico. And she has taught me a lot. I have a hard time speaking English, but also speaking Spanish. I've had a rough time, but my wife has taught me a lot about, history, beliefs, and just being yourself.
You've given us a wonderful background, a foundation for understanding the situation that farm workers are facing, whether they're long-term or migrating. What experience are farm workers facing with COVID, with the pandemic right now?
We've been advocating for at least 3 months, Rosalind, just on the COVID-19, pressing and pushing the governor, but also pressuring the health department, LNI, and the different departments that are responsible for the disasters that are happening and that are about to happen even worse. I think for us it's just challenging to have the support and making sure that the same message gets out. I've been kind of tired of just asking and pushing the health department since the beginning. Get the messages out in the right languages. We deal with a lot of indigenous languages and even Spanish. It was hard for them to translate materials into Spanish, but working with my local health department and Whatcom and other places and with the state, they were like asking each other, and then the messages weren't the same. And what I was telling them, I'm not here to do your job. I'm here to ask you to do your job, and I'm willing to help you, but it's not my job, it's your responsibility. And we might be the middle person to make sure that the message gets out to our community. And there's a lot of differences. We weren't here to advocate and to force the government to get us at least masks and information and even just flyers to our community. I don't know what would happen. And we're starting to go out and meet up with the farm workers where they live in the migrant camps, and it's a whole different world. And they don't have the proper equipment, and they just started doing testing to the people that are going to be registering for work. But what my worry is that what happens to the rest of the family. So if one person applies but the rest of the family doesn't, they don't get tested. And they live in a small migrant camp in a cabin that you could see 6 to 8 people in a 1-bedroom home.
You need to see it in the context of what we just said about our history, right? That since the 1930s, farm workers in the United States have been Latinos, Mexican American mostly. There has been a structure created around us so that we could be the labor needed to create the US-based industrial agricultural system that is now incredibly wealthy and has a lot of political power. Mm-hmm. In our area, you can look at it nationally and locally. The reason that the COVID-19 is so dangerous to our community, and the reason that Yakima is spiking, and I understand now Skagit is going to start spiking, is because those are agricultural communities where the major industrial economic powerhouse is agriculture, and they need us to work on the land to make them their profit. And so the systems that have been put up to sustain this labor force that the agricultural industry needs have been created now for 30 years. And that's within the Department of Labor and Industries, the Health Department, because of the use of pesticides, and the Housing Department, because they put us in labor camps, because we're too poor to afford our own housing or to have anywhere to live, because they're migrant workers, we're migrant workers. And then the Department of Ag, which does all the marketing and supposedly is laying this vision for agriculture that's supposed to include us but doesn't. So for all of these years, we have not received adequate protection in basic needs for generations: access to health care, clean, safe housing, workplace protections from pesticides and injuries. The average life of a farm worker in the United States is still 49 years. That is because of the lack of, safety, livable wages, it's pesticides, the whole thing, right? All of these years, folks like myself and Jose have been advocating using the system, and what's allowed for us to try to create structural change has not happened. So now we've got this pandemic where we have to survive in the structure that was created not to keep us safe, but to get the last vestige of work and labor out of us. So when when Jose talks about the health department coming and talking to us to try to figure out how to get the message out to farm workers, well, there's no structure to do that. They're coming to us now when everybody else was working to protect everybody else in early February, right? And here it is June because the harvest is coming. All of a sudden, everybody's concerned about farm workers. What I want to say is we're not even on the radar.
I would like to draw some other issues onto the radar screen that you've hinted at and already discussed, but time flies and we need to wrap up this part of the discussion. But as you get a sense from Jose and Rosalinda, there is so much more to talk about, the problems that people are encountering in the camps, how we might address that, and how people might ally themselves to help the farm workers. And Rosalinda and Jose, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to continue this conversation in next week's edition of Challenge 2.0. Thank you for joining us, and please join us next week.